Thank you for joining us again. We're here with Esme and she's going to be discussing promoting choice and control in companion animals, simple ways to enhance well-being, which is a lot of what we're talking about today. So I'd like to introduce Esme. She is an experienced animal welfare expert, animal advocate and clinical behaviourist who specialises in companion animals. Here's a list. She also holds a PGCE, is a fellow of the Higher Education Academy, a member of the Animal Behaviour and Training Council, the ABTC, and is an animal training instructor and a pre-certified clinical animal behaviourist and candidate member of the Fellowship of Animal Behaviour. I wasn't ever going to learn this off the top of my head, so I'm sorry that I'm reading it. But you're also currently working, and very, very recently, working for a leading global equine charity as an advocacy and affairs advisor, previously having worked at the RSPCA as the Science and Policy Officer for Dog Welfare. There is a list, and I'm so, so grateful for Esme being here. But let's get to know you after all of that. Let's get to know you a little bit better.
Sure.
So can you give us a short summary of some of the animals you've kept and what they've meant to you?
Yeah, and that's a lovely question, and thank you for that very over-exaggerated opener, which I feel sets expectations sky high. So yeah, I have lived and shared my life with animals ever since I was very young. It was a huge part of my family life. Now I look back in slight horror at some of the, not that there was any sort of deliberate bad things, but I think because I've now learned so much in terms of animal, behaviour and the welfare needs of animals, you can't help but look back critically. Yeah. So there were a range of animals from a very young age, including rabbits, dogs, but I would say that some of the animals that have really stuck out have been my mum's dog, or our family dog, and he really piqued my interest, and this was about 10 years ago, in training. And I actually started to, with no knowledge at all, just a few treats, train him to do certain things. And that really sort of sparked my interest into how animals...
What breed was he?
He was a King Charles Cavalier, and a rescue, I must add that. And I just started to get interested in how they learn and how they interact with us and the kind of communication that's going on between us. So that sparked an interest that turned into a bit of a passion, that led me on to university, and then turned into a career. So that's one. And because I've got too many, I can't leave out my own dogs, but I have two wonderful rescue dogs, and I'd say that the key thing I've learned from them has really been about letting go of my own ego and my own expectations. Because when I acquired my dogs, I really wanted, I saw their behaviour as a reflection of my skills, and it really isn't the case. And so it's been a learning process. They are what they are, and it's not really about me and my sort of ego, and it's been an amazing life learner.
Do you mean that the behaviour of your dog was sort of mirroring you, or a reflection of how you were working with them?
I think because I thought, I'm in the industry and this is my profession, I ought to have these impeccably trained dogs.
Right, okay.
That's not how it worked out. They're incredibly complex.
Right. And do you think more so because they're rescue?
No, and I think it's really, really, I couldn't possibly differentiate why it is. I think it's important that we don't put all rescue dogs in this category of being complex and challenging, because that's not the case at all.
Okay.
Dogs are just individuals, and they're a product of a huge complex set of interrelating factors: their early life, their genetics, their mother, the experiences that she had, their learning history, their health. So it's really complex.
So it's nature and nurture still?
Yeah,
still
absolutely combining. Okay. Yeah.
So your role is in equine at the moment, but you have a particular passion for dogs, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love all animals. I'd say that the majority of my career has been spent focusing on companion animals. Okay. And despite what a lot of people think, I'm really passionate about improving welfare, because there is so much need. I think people forget that companion animals have these huge welfare deficits. We tend to think that they're kind of the lucky ones compared to other species of animal. And I would actually argue against that. I'd say that their proximity to humans and their longevity means that welfare risks can be quite serious in this group of animals. But yeah, now I'm working in the equine space and absolutely loving that.
Fantastic. So today is obviously about the human-animal bond, not just dog, but what can you tell us about the dog and human relationship, which makes it unique, because whether rightly or wrongly, some people will let the dog sleep on the bed, and they will, well, I was going to say my dog doesn't right now, but if I had a choice. And is that acceptable? And are we pushing boundaries of the canine and human relationship to a point where it's not good for the dog?
Yeah, such a great question, and several different layers there. I'll start with the fact that the human and dog relationship and bond, it is unique. And that's because we evolved together from about 15 to 30,000 years ago. So we had this process where we kind of domesticated each other. And it's a myth to think that we domesticated dogs. Actually, they helped us transition from hunter-gatherer society to agricultural-based societies, as much as we sort of turned them into the animals they are today. So there's that. Okay. And that proximity to humans for thousands of years is something you don't see anywhere else in the animal kingdom. And that's given dogs really unique abilities. So they have these amazing abilities to read human emotional states and communication signals that you don't see anywhere else. They even outdo chimps on those kind of tests. So that's really awesome. Mm-hmm. Then you have the fact that dogs form really strong attachment bonds that are very similar to the bonds that children form with their parents. And they also produce lots of oxytocin when they gaze lovingly at their owners.
Are they gazing lovingly at us, or are they just hungry?
No, this is the myth. People think that, I mean, it's probably a bit of both. But I will say that we know that dogs produce, and they have a surge, a really big one, and so do we, in oxytocin, which is the love hormone, for anyone that doesn't know. And yeah, so I think that speaks for itself. They do love us as much as we love them.
Well, my dog particularly, he has those eyes. And I think, haven't they got an extra muscle that has the eyes so they can make puppy dog eyes, I believe?
Have they?
Apparently so. They have a knack of being able to look at us like that with the puppy dog face.
Yeah, absolutely. And so they get a good response for it as well.
They do, but he wins every time.
Absolutely. So it's learning there as well.
Yeah, he has learned. It's amazing. But so in the current situation where we allow dogs in our house, we allow them on the sofa, we allow them on the bed, we treat them and talk to them. And I enjoy that. I can't say I don't enjoy having that relationship and that bond. Love my horse, but he's in a field. I don't have that same closeness with him as I do with my dog, just because of the proximity and the amount of time. But doing that, does that cause some challenges to the dogs that we have in our society today?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important to sort of be balanced on that, because the relationship between dogs and humans is nuanced. It always has been. So whilst there have been great benefits from bringing dogs into the home, and I absolutely love sleeping with my dog. It's a pleasure, and he's on the sofa with me. He goes wherever he likes. That's great. However, I think that there have been trade-offs for dogs in the fact that we've kind of, brought them inside. They've become a lot more confined. They've lost a huge amount of control and freedom over their own life and the decisions that they can make. The freedom to roam has been taken away for the majority of dogs, and they have really, kind of lived lives that have shrunk in a way, mostly in the house, quite controlled and confined and in some ways limited. And that can have consequences for their welfare and behaviour, and also for the welfare and behaviour of humans.
And you made a very good point when we first talked about, when I walk my dog, do I allow him to go where he wants to go? Can you explain that to people a bit?
Sure. So this falls under a kind of branch of looking after dogs and things that we can do with dogs, which we call choice and control. And that really is just about giving dogs the freedom to have a bit of agency or autonomy over their own lives. So the freedom to make choices and have control over situations. And letting them take the route, lead the route on a walk, is a great way to provide for that. So yeah, absolutely. It's something I often forget to do. I have to remind myself, but just allowing them to walk where they want is a really nice way to give them a bit of freedom.
Because we control so much of their lives, does that have an impact on their welfare and their well-being and their mental state? If it's you would know better than I what dogs are highly strung and need to be active more than those that really are quite happy to not. And it's tuning into those breeds, isn't it, and understanding what each dog needs and how to enrich their lives. But have we negatively, unintentionally in most cases, had a negative effect on their behaviours because of our choices?
I think that, There are negative consequences for dogs, and this impacts on their behaviour and their welfare, and we see that in increasing numbers of problem behaviours in the population of dogs. But, you know, I would stress that most people are doing the best they can with the knowledge that they have, and it really doesn't come from a place of willful neglect or cruelty. Quite often it just comes from a lack of awareness and knowledge about dogs, and that's why it's so important to talk about them, because they do share our lives in such a proximate way. But I would say that it's really, again, it's important to sort of emphasise that dogs are individuals and their behaviour is very little to do with breed.
Right.
It's to do with, you know, their life experiences and all the things I sort of spoke about before.
Yeah. And what behaviours are a common problem that need to be rectified or managed that you see in the behaviour sector?
So people can struggle with many things. Often they coalesce around separation-related issues, and that kind of slots into what we spoke about when we said that some of the things that have changed for dogs is that they have long periods of isolation, and they can often be left on their own for long periods of time. And the dog is one of the most social species on the planet. It just didn't evolve a behavioural way of coping with isolation. So that's one thing. Then we get frustration-related behaviours. Yeah, so these might be your sort of, some of these are simple training issues, pulling on the lead perhaps, not kind of having that early learning about what we expect of dogs. And then you can have more, you know, difficult behavioural problems that might focus on things like aggressive behaviour or sensitivities, worries, fears around certain things. So there are lots of issues that we see.
Can you teach an old dog new tricks?
Absolutely.
They can be changed no matter the age or their experiences?
Yeah, so it's a myth that dogs socialise in one small finite period. That's not true. Dogs can be socialised, as indeed can any animal and human, we're animals too, throughout the entirety of their life. Right. Socialisation is a lifelong process, if you like. And absolutely, dogs can be taught new things at any age. Okay. What I would say, though, is if you have a problem behaviour which has been long-running for a significant period of time, the dog has had so much time to practice that behaviour and therefore kind of perfect it and learn that it works for them, and that can be more difficult to treat.
Okay. What other ways can we allow, apart from going on a walk, in the house or in the garden, how can we allow our dogs to have more choice?
Yeah, okay. So I think in the house it can come down to allowing dogs the freedom to have lots of different areas that they might want to rest in. And just to sort of emphasise, this can all be applied to other companion animals too, and in fact any animal. It's not just dogs. Choice and control is a concept that goes across species and for us as well. So, you know, simple things. It could be about sort of giving them a choice of toy, a choice of resting space, a choice of treat even. Perhaps if you're doing a bit of training, do they want a bit of apple or a bit of cucumber or whatever they might like. And then it can come across into more of the social side of things. So allowing dogs or any animal in the home a choice to interact with people, children, other animals, stuff like that. And
do you think dogs should, when they're out and about on a walk, should they mix with other dogs, or are you a little bit nervous of dogs mixing in case there are conflicts?
So it entirely depends on the dog. And there are some dogs who absolutely, just like people, love to go and be super social in the park and have a great time. And I see that in my own park, and I'm kind of envious of that, because then you get other dogs like my dogs that are much less social and they don't really want other dogs coming up in their face. Right. They're fine from a distance, but they'd rather not, thank you. So it just depends on the dog. And it's really important that dog caregivers and owners get really attuned to their dog's ways of communicating with them, and that's through body language. So learning things about what might show that your dog's a bit uncomfortable.
There's a lot more fields, isn't there now, enclosed fields that you can take your dog to and let it off the lead in a safe environment with dogs that you choose to socialise with. I suppose that's a positive thing now, isn't it?
Yeah, massively, and I'm a huge fan of that. Good. Because I use those fields for my dogs, and I love it. So yeah, I'd recommend anyone to do the same if they have a dog that isn't keen on a park full of dogs.
And so, what's your view on at the moment with if you had a dog with, sadly, a muzzle on? They should still let your dog talk to them, because there's still a little bit of nervousness about that, isn't there? If people do see a dog with a muzzle, doesn't mean there's a problem.
No, absolutely. Muzzles can be used for lots of different things. So dogs might be muzzled because they are worried by perhaps people or cars or children or other animals. They might be at risk to small furry animals. Yes. They might actually just be really prone to picking things up and eating things that they shouldn't. So there can be lots of different reasons. But I do think because muzzles can be used for dogs who are worried by other dogs and people, it would be really sensible to always ask the dog owner and really give space. You know, I wouldn't approach a dog with a muzzle on because there is a chance that that's a very, very clear signal that that dog's not comfortable. So it's just really important to ask.
Yeah, I understand that. And so how much of the behaviour work do you get to do now you've got this new job and you're working with that? Do you get to do it in your own time? Is it something you...
Not really. Here I am giving you all this. No, I was in clinical behaviour for a few years with different charities and in veterinary practices, and then seeing some of my own clients, and I've moved into a sort of different area, trying to advocate for changes for companion animals and dogs, more kind of in the policy legislative space. Yeah.
So if you've got a message out today to some dog owners of what we could do and what we can control that could improve their lives, enrich their lives, give us some points apart from, you know, different toys or anything else that we can do to make it more interesting for them.
Yeah, I would say one of the key things I think is to remember, I think people forget this, that dogs and all animals, but particularly companion animals that share our home, work really hard to fit in with us and to please us.
Right.
They're working hard
Cats?
all the time. Cats, yeah, absolutely, they do. It's not in their interest to cause problems.
No,
it just isn't. It doesn't pay off for them. So they work really hard to kind of to please us, to fit in, and to make things work. And actually, I think people often forget that. You know, and I understand why, because dealing with problem behaviour or, you know, training issues can be really difficult. It can be resource intensive, frustrating for the human and the family too. But generally, there is a good reason if there's a problem behaviour going on or a training issue, and it's important to sort of remember that and to sort of lead with, I think, compassion. So I would just encourage people to remember that their dogs are trying really hard, and the way that we can improve things for them, help them, is by being really consistent, predictable, calm and kind.
Do dogs, like horses, want routine?
I think dogs love routine.
They do.
Yeah, that's not to say that they are not adaptable and able to cope with lots of, because they are. They're incredibly adaptable. But I do think that they thrive with a predictable, consistent routine. That provides security.
And in the charities you've worked with, they must have big departments for behaviour to deal with everything that's coming in. How do they assess the animals? Because if it's an unknown and it's a stray, how do you know what the sort of trigger points could be?
Yeah, so I think that it's really important that, you know, there are robust behavioural assessments, and generally that can come through observing dogs, and you can get a really good idea of their emotional state by observing them. Dogs are great communicators. We're just not so great at picking up on it.
Okay, that's a really good point, isn't it? So each of the different charities will have a behaviour centre, and is it when they've settled that they will put them up for fostering or adoption? Is it down to the individual? Is there a time point you go, we can't do anything here?
Well, I mean, it really is different between charities, and so I think all charities have their own kind of policies and ways of working on this. Right. I have worked in some charities where dogs who are very traumatised have been put directly into an experienced foster home, and that's great because they wouldn't, you know, thrive in a kennel environment. Okay. So that's always preferable. But generally, you know, once a dog has sort of settled down and they've been able to assess it, then it can go up for adoption. Okay.
So there's some harmful myths out there about dogs and cats. Can you give us some examples and why you want to dispel these myths?
Yeah, there are lots of myths that have attached themselves to dogs. I think some of it comes from people's kind of anthropomorphism, so projecting the human qualities onto dogs and other animals. And some of it comes from poor science, which really misrepresented dogs. But I'd say one of the biggest myths is around dominance.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So there was a piece of research that was done many years ago now, and it was looking at captive wolves, and it applied the findings of captive wolves onto the species of domestic dog, which was probably not a very good idea anyway, but captive wolves don't even behave like natural wolves. So it really was a piece of science that was poorly applied to domestic dogs, and it has no bearing on their behaviour. But it really took hold, sadly, and it's had massive consequences for them. But what we know about dogs is they're not trying to dominate their owners or their family members or other dogs. They're actually very cooperative as a group of animals. When they live together as free-roaming dogs, they're very cooperative, cohesive and friendly. And that's how they are with people. So I think that's one of the most important things we need to dispel, because that sad application of that myth and that pseudoscience essentially has really given rise to lots of very harmful practices of training.
Give us an example.
Yeah, so it's given sort of rise to people's belief that dogs are trying to dominate them, and therefore they've felt the need to approach that with kind of punitive, intimidating and often quite painful methods of training. And that's really sad, because it's not acceptable anyway, but dogs are not trying to dominate or, you know, get the upper hand over humans.
Cats, give us something about cats.
Okay, so I think this applies to all animals, but yeah, we can take this one with cats. Animals have emotions, we know that scientifically, but they don't necessarily have exactly the same emotions that we have. So we know that they can feel joy, we know that they can feel sad, we know that they can be frightened and frustrated.
Right.
But what they don't feel is guilt. And that's, a lot of people think that they do, but guilt is actually a really complex emotion that involves, if you think about it, a lot of mental time travel. You kind of have to think about the consequences of your actions and project it forward. And cats and dogs don't really do that. They're much more in the moment. Yeah. So that's a myth that kind of attached itself to cats and dogs, because often if people have come home and perhaps there's been a bit of destruction, people tell the animal off, and then what they'll see is what they perceive to be a guilty face. And actually it's just the animal being quite worried and frightened of your
reaction.
Yeah. So that's another myth.
Any more?
Sure, there are lots more. I'm trying to think of any off the top of my head. I think that's probably the two biggest ones.
Okay, so there's positive and negativity that we're putting on our animals at the moment. So if you could change any behaviours that you generally see out there, what would they be?
I think with dogs it would just be really simple, and this is going to sound really, really simple, but just letting them sniff when they go on walks. They are an olfactory species, so their primary sense is their smell, and that's how they actually experience the world. So we are a visual species, but dogs, their main sense is their smell, and it kind of makes me really sad when I see them being dragged past a really interesting smell. Just let them smell. I'm not saying you have to spend longer on a walk, but yeah, you know, I took my dog on a walk the other day, and we spent about 10 minutes at a post box. In fact, somebody came up to me and asked if I was okay. I said, yeah, I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine. So, but she was having such an amazing time, and it's great. And actually, just get interested about that, curious about that. Wow.
Do we know their hearing and their smell in comparison to ours, how much better it is?
Yeah, so they have a much more sensitive range of hearing than we do. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it might be up to 30 times. So that's important in terms of how we, you know, protect them from noise, for instance, and the places that we might not want to take them, i.e. pubs and festivals. And the smell, I did read one really good analogy, and it was that if you had, I think it was 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools, and you put half a teaspoon of sugar, a dog would be able to smell that. Yeah.
That's impressive.
Yeah, very impressive. And that, again, has implications for sniffing, but also for the kind of smells that we expose them to. So I'm now really cautious about wearing perfume. And Yep, I noticed that if I do wear perfume, and sometimes I do, but I won't go near the dog. Okay. And if I do, he will actually look away in disgust, and I'm not surprised. It must smell horrendous to him.
Didn't think of that. And it's like plug in air fresheners and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Air fresheners, I would say, you know, harsh detergents like bleach and polishes, anything and even paint. You know, if you're having a repainting of your house, then perhaps get the dog to a friend for a weekend. Yeah. So lots of simple things.
I think that leads us on to your advice on fireworks, because there's a lot out there, a lot of advice, and desensitization is a great thing to do, but it does take time and it does take effort from the client. We're talking way in advance of the fireworks. And fireworks season isn't just fireworks season, isn't it? Because it's 5th of November. You got Halloween, which is a bit spooky for some animals, isn't it? Then you've got fireworks. Then you've got Christmas, and then you've got New Year. And thrown into that, sometimes you'll have Diwali or weddings and things. So is there any advice that you could give about animals? And so maybe somebody's just taken on a rescue and they've noticed that they're nervous of certain noises. What's your advice that we could do to help them with the human activities that we have no control over?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a massive welfare issue affecting lots of dogs. And I'm sure you have dogs yourself. You must know that it's a really difficult time of year.
I don't go out.
Yeah.
I put pheromones on him.
Yep.
He has the walk in the evening earlier. He has a stodgy meal. He has a den if he wants to. I make a lovely den, but he's like, no, I don't. I want to sit on the sofa with you, next to you, literally, body contact.
Yeah.
So I comfort him, and I wouldn't dare go out.
Yeah. Lovely. But
people do go out, and sometimes they have fireworks in their garden. And there was an incident at our house a few years ago where a neighbour set fireworks off, and I have got to say I never knew how loud they were until I was near them, very near them, and it spooked me.
They are, and I think that we forget that, and it's great that you had that, well, not great, but it's good that you had that experience, because they are really loud, and with dogs and with other animals, they actually can feel the vibrations as well.
I can imagine.
And they can, depending on how close they are, there's also the smell, which is probably quite alarming. So they are getting a kind of a full sensory experience of it, and a lot of dogs find it incredibly worrying. So all the things that you said are brilliant. I would just add into that, if you've got the time, like starting now, start getting your dog used to them. There are great resources and sort of apps that you can use where you start off at a really low gradient of noise. You pair that with something lovely, so a bit of cheese, whatever your dog loves, and you start to build up that positive association. But if you have got a dog who's really worried, then it might be and you haven't had time to prepare, or their worry and their fear is just such an extreme response.
Which you see sometimes, don't you?
Yeah, I've actually, with my own dog,
Have you?
Yeah. One of my dogs is incredibly worried, and the way that manifests is in shaking, not being able to eat anything. That's a sign that dogs are very worried, and then also urinating in the house. Yes. So this was obviously a real concern, and a very unhappy dog. So I make sure that he has medication in the house that we get from the vet. It's prescribed. And
I think that's an important point, is knowing when you can manage it yourself and when you're going to need help.
Absolutely, it's really crucial. There is a difference between a dog who's just perhaps a little bit worried, a little bit uncomfortable, and a dog who's terrified.
And it's not just fireworks, is it? It could be phones, it could be fires, it can be thunderstorms, it can be beeping of lorries. There's a whole array of things, and you hear it when people talk to you about their dog and the fear their dog has. It's not just fireworks. It's a massive subject, and the more we can do, the better. I think the Dogs Trust has sounds. I think it's I can't remember what it's. Sound sensitive, I think it is, and sound social. So the Dogs Trust has some resources to be able to help you. And I urge you to, if you're looking at fireworks coming season and you think your rescue might be a little bit nervous, or a new puppy might be nervous, start the work now.
Absolutely, with all dogs. You know, if you have acquired a puppy or any kind of dog from anywhere, then it's really important part of getting them used to this heavily urbanised world that we live in.
And cats as well. People do forget cats and keeping them in, but then keeping them in stresses them out. So there's another welfare sort of worry there, that if you keep for a weekend, you can't let your cat out because there's going to be fireworks let off in a local park. That also can be a concern because the cat is frustrated for not going out. Yeah, and it really is about timings then. And I think, like you said, especially with dogs, making sure that you've walked them early enough, and with cats, perhaps that they've had their time out in the day when it is unlikely that people let fireworks off, but that they're coming in the evening. And of course, this applies to rabbits and animals that are left outside, horses. Every year we see animals, dying. And that would be a nice moment if you can talk to us a little bit about rabbits and their welfare, because it is a different subject. We do tend to home in, certainly today, donkeys, but dogs and cats, horses. But there's hundreds of thousands of rabbits being kept, rightly or wrongly by themselves, in cages, or hutches, sorry. What's your advice for how somebody could enrich a rabbit's life more?
Yeah, I'm really glad that we're talking about this, because rabbits are often the forgotten companion animal, but there's nearly 1 million of them in the UK, and they are the 3rd most popular pet.
Right.
Not that I like that word. And they actually suffer some of the worst welfare out of all animals, companion animals. And it really does come down to the things that you've talked about, being restricted in tiny cages, completely inappropriate way to keep this animal. You know, in the wild, they would travel enormous distances in the day, football pitches. So they really do need a huge amount of space to be able to run, jump, binky, do all their natural behaviours. And then we've got the other side, which is that rabbits are, again, an intensely social species. They live in huge groups in the wild, and it is completely unnatural for them to be in a cage on their own. So that's a huge welfare issue. They should never be kept alone. They should always be kept with another rabbit.
Have you any more tips for us as pet owners, what we can do? I know we're coming up to time, but anything else that you could tell us that we could put into practice?
Yeah, I think that I would just say, when it comes to the animals that you're living with in your house, make sure you've got a safe haven set up. So that's a space where your cat or your dog, whatever you've got, can go, and they can be free from any kind of interference. That's really important. I think when we think about our own lives, I love my own space, don't know about you. Yeah. And it's the same for them. And especially if we've got busy households or households with kids, just a blanket where, when the dog's on that bed or wherever, nobody goes near them.
That's a really good point with children as well, because they do want to react. But yeah, that's the word. It's been a long day. That they want to have time with that animal, and their feeling is, I will come and wake that animal up, or I will come and play with you even if you don't want to. So what are some ground rules for owners out there that might be thinking of getting a dog that have got young children? Because I think we can direct the older children and be a little bit more stern with them, but the younger children who don't understand why we're saying things, have you got any advice for the owners of pets with children?
Yeah, I think it can go terribly wrong, and I've seen that.
Right.
Waking dogs from sleep is one area that I have seen, children sustaining really bad bites. Right. We never wake a dog from sleep. Let sleeping dogs lie. Yeah. It's a truism, because they get startled. But actually, when done right, it can be a great opportunity for children from a young age to learn to be respectful towards animals. And so I would just say it's really about instilling that respect, not treating dogs as toys, letting them have a space where, when they're on that space, that's them, leave them alone. And also, thinking about the kind of physical interactions that we have with them. Dogs are not humans, they're not primates, which we are. We like hugging, arms around. But dogs actually don't do that together.
Diane earlier didn't like hugging, did she? She said, I don't like a hug. So it's the same with them, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know some people will say, but my dog does. And of course it varies. We're talking about averages, not individuals. But generally speaking, dogs don't really appreciate that kind of intense
and that's
social.
That is something that I know, and I'm here guilty of having a National Human Animal Bond Awareness Day. But there are many days, aren't there? And there was one that was, and I did look at it a little bit. It was like National Hug Your Pet Day.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Problematic, and I'm sure it's been set up with the best of intentions. But I think one thing that we need to do is respect animals for being different to us. They are their own species, and by and large, they don't appreciate hugging. And that's especially true for animals like rabbits, prey animals, who are, they've evolved to be really fearful of looming movements and anything that's larger than or coming at them in that way, because that could be a predator. So they find interactions like that really stressful. So I'm not saying don't interact with your animals, but put choice and control at the heart of it and let them come to you. And you think you'll really be surprised at how much they will appreciate that. And I've seen it with my own dogs. The people that are much more hands-off, because I was guilty of being a bit over the top with my dogs when I first got them. And I really noticed that with my friends and family who were much more calmer around them, they would, locate themselves near them. So, yeah, they appreciate it.
What's been the biggest learning for you in your journey of behaviour? And as you've said, you've learnt things, and you're being very honest, saying, I've learnt how to react with my dog. What's been the biggest learning about your relationship with your dogs?
I think it really just comes down to those 4 words. that I learned when I was doing my master's, actually, from my lecturer at the time, Daniel Mills, so I can't take credit for it. But he said, you know, the most important things that we could do for our companion animals is just providing an environment, and this transcends and goes into our interactions with them, which is calm, predictable, consistent, kind. And I guess I
Can you just say that again for people that missed that the first time?
Yeah, sure. So calm, really important, a calm environment. I think that's good for everybody. A consistent environment. So that comes into things like, you know, if you let the dog on the sofa sometimes, don't expect the dog to understand when it's not allowed on the sofa. It might be around things like if you feed your dog or your cat from your table when you're eating, don't be annoyed when you're perhaps having a dinner with friends and they're sitting there waiting, expecting to get fed. So it's about that consistency, and it's about predictability.
Right.
So you know, interacting with them in a way which is predictable, not chaotic or frightening in any way. And transcending all of that is kindness, and I think that's the most important thing. So yeah, that's what I would say.
That's been absolutely brilliant. That last few minutes on that, I think we can all take away something from that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. If people wanted to get advice on behaviour, where would you suggest they go to?
Yeah, so this is a bit of a minefield because unfortunately at the moment the behaviour and training sector is unregulated. I'm hoping that will change.
Right.
So it just means that, you know, it's a minefield out there and people are not assured of the kind of quality that they're getting.
Right.
So I would direct people to the ABTC, which is the Animal Behaviour and Training Council, which, you know, strictly regulates its practitioners and make sure that everybody is following scientific reward-based techniques in the training of animals.
Perfect. So thank Esme very much for her time today, and we'll be back at 4 o'clock. Thank you.